So a little bit about us in just like 60 seconds or less. We are a 17-year-old investment firm based in Denver, Colorado, with offices in New York and Tel Aviv. We're about 23 people and growing. We invest in public and private companies in the US and globally, and we've been active in Israel for the last 10 years or so. So we invest across all stages, from first check-in, from seed, through IPO, through the last check, and we can stay on as public equity investors via our hedge fund arm. So my strategy, speaking for the early stage fund, is to lead rounds up to $5 million initial check size. So typically that'll be a seed or series A. And we look across all sectors and industries. So we are sector agnostic. And the same goes for our growth stage Israel fund. We look to lead rounds there across a variety of industries. So I hope that gives you guys a flavor of what we do.
Thank you, Nicole. This is great. And of course, we'll hear more from Nicole about, what investors think, and as I promised, what happens behind the scenes. Our second guest in this seminar is Donna Griffey. Hi, Donna. So happy to have you. For those who don't know Donna and her experience, she is a corporate storyteller who worked and still is with hundreds of startups and many corporates and Fortune 500 companies. I'd like to quote Donna. Donna says that the hardest thing for a company is to explain to people what they do and why it matters, right? This is a very famous quote of Donna. And today, based on her experience of interviewing many investors, decision makers, and even founders, Donna will help us to learn the ground rules of the perfect pitch. Hi, Donna. Can you give us some hints about what are the key points we are going to discover today?
I don't want to spoil it, and we've got so much to hear from Nicole first, which I'm looking forward to. But basically, I've been a fly on the wall on hundreds of meetings that some made me just sit there cringing, and some made me just sit there cheering and prepping the companies for it. So we're really going to give you an insider look into the mind of how investors think, and also the layer of the storytelling to best pivot your story, especially during these times.
Perfect, thank you. So as I said, we are going to start with some questions that I prepared so I can help you warm up for this discussion. And it's great to see your photos, and I'm very happy that we have some of you actually joining us live. Really feel free to share yourself, share your stories, and share the questions that you have for us today. So let's start with a question for Nicole. Nicole, I think that before we start with Donna's presentation about writing and preparing the pitch, I think people need to know, since we are not familiar with everyone that sits here in the room. Let's start with, understanding how VC firms work, or maybe how VCs think, right? So, well, I'm sure we can have a whole seminar just about how VCs work and what's going on with VCs and how they make decisions. But for today's purpose, let's keep the first question about how VCs work, and let's jump into how VCs think, because I think this is what people are interested to learn.
Yeah, sure. So
yeah, please.
Yes, so I'll jump in. As you indicated, it's such a heavy question, and I can take it in any direction. So if I don't answer one of your focus areas, this goes for anyone, type it into the chat or send me an email, and I'd be happy to pick it up either here or offline. But I think what probably interests you is how do we think about making investments? So let's say we're a fund, and we just did this last year. We went out and we raised $100 million from investors, and we say we're going to return that money, multiples of that money, in 10 years. So trust us with that capital. We're going to go deploy it into startups. We're going to choose, a dozen or so companies that we think are the most promising ones, and lock up your money with us for a decade, because we're going to just turn that around and give you more when everything is up. So then we get capital commitments from our investors, from our LPs. we go out and we talk to the market, and our strategy, specifically is to do seed and Series A investments. So what we're looking for, and different companies have different targets, but generally at the early stage investors are looking to gain quite significant ownership in a company. So, that can sometimes mean 20-25% dilution for founders in their first check. And the idea is that because there's going to be subsequent founding rounds, the VC is going to be diluted time and time again. So they want to secure that high ownership in the beginning. And their whole idea is to return the fund, right? So they make a number of investments a year. Over the lifetime of the fund, some of those investments will go to zero. Some will be kind of like decent returners. They won't lose money, they won't make a ton of money. And then you will probably have one or two that are outstanding returners of your fund. So if you think about something like an Uber or a Zoom or an Airbnb, that would be an outstanding investment. And that'll make up for all of the losses that you make, like all the other investments that you make during the lifetime of the fund. So for the first 3 years or so, 3 to 5 years, a fund is actively investing, making new investments. So for you guys as entrepreneurs, the earlier in a fund's life cycle that you approach them, the more active they're going to be. Towards the later end of the fund's life cycle, they're going to be more focused on follow-on investments in their existing portfolio companies. Then they will be actively investing. And the later on in the fund's life cycle that they make new investments, the more they're going to be pressured for exits. So in year 1 or 2 of a VC fund, that's probably the best time that you could actually approach them. They're the most willing to take risk. So yeah, that's basically it. And in terms of the numbers, I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't understand why a lot of the times investors say the market's too small. You'll say, no, but wait, the $2 billion market. To an ordinary person, that's huge. That is a really big number. For investors, especially funds that are, call it over $50 million in size, that's peanuts. So when we're talking about total addressable market, our eyes light up when you're talking about tens of billions of dollars. So to use the example of Uber, you're talking about humans of basically age 15 to 75 can take Ubers in any country in the world. Take something like DoorDash, right? That's a huge market as well, because almost anyone, any company, any resident is going to be ordering food. And so that's kind of an idea of what a big market is. So investors are looking for 1 or 2 outstanding investments that can return the fund and address huge markets, because they're looking for those outliers. I hope that made sense.
Great. So now that we understand a little bit, how you guys, I say you as VCs in general think, since our intention today is to talk about pitch, and the perfect pitch, I think it's really interesting for people to know, if you can, I don't know, give us the 3-5 things that will typically motivate an investor to agree for a meeting with a startup, with your experience.
Okay, wow, that's such a good question. So motivate me for a meeting with a startup. So yeah, there's a lot of debate about warm intros versus cold intros. Should you approach an investor kind of through an existing connection or not? I personally am a big believer in cold intros are awesome. I've met a lot of outstanding entrepreneurs through cold intros. However, if it's one of my connections, someone in my network, a fellow VC who's made an email introduction or says, hey, do you want to check out this company? The odds are I'm going to say yes because of the existing relationship. So that's always a step up. But even beyond that, in the initial email, think about it. We all have email overload. So we're all getting, dozens, hundreds of emails a day. You want to write something that's really crisp and really punchy. You don't want to write an essay. You don't want to regurgitate your entire pitch deck in text format in the email. It's always best practice to send over a teaser deck or a 1-pager that gives us an overview of the business. And then a few lines hey, this is who we are. These are the founders. This is our quick bio. And this is a problem that we're working on. And we would love to dig in a little bit more. Make sure, and this should go without saying, but I see it so often, make sure that you haven't just copied and pasted a text from, another email and like the text formatting is all off, and some is like in Times New Roman, and some is size 11 and the other size like 12. I see that all the time. It's terrible. Try to personalize it as much as you can. And I know that's not super scalable, but don't write "Dear Investor." That's never a good sign. Show me that you've done a little bit of homework on the fund. Say, you could write, I checked out your existing investments, like great job on that exit. Or because of your investments in X, Y, and Z, we really think that our company would be interesting for IBEX. So that always, will pique my interest if you've done your homework. And then I guess that was probably more than 3, so I'll leave it at that.
Great. These are great tips. And I see Donna on the other side of my screen nodding her head with agreements.
And Nicole is just strengthening things that I've seen. And it's sometimes, I've heard VC say it's the little things that are the difference between, I sat down with a partner here in the Valley, and he said that there's so many great companies that sometimes they nitpick and look for the reasons to say no. And he said it could be something as simple as in the middle of the meeting, somebody looking at their phone. I've heard investors say if a founder is not taking written notes, not on your computer, not on your phone, it shows a lack of coachability. And it's amazing how many times I hear this. So it's sometimes just the little details of how you interact that speaks volumes to you, and everything matters.
Right. And, Nicole mentioned the one pager, and I know Donna and I had a long conversation about the differences between what exactly is a one pager? What do we have in a way? Is it really a one page? Is it a deck of 5, 10, 20 slides? What is the custom in sending, and as Nicole said, adding to your first initial email a one pager? And I know Donna told me in the past that there is a difference between what is expected in Israel versus in Europe versus the US. Nicole, Donna, can you give us
I'd love to hear from Nicole.
highlights?
Just from my highlight, nobody here will open a one pager in the States. They won't look at a one pager. Nicole mentioned a teaser deck. So you want to choose like your 8 most compelling slides. We'll talk about that a bit in my workshop and what should be in there. A one pager should be a snapshot of the story you're telling in your deck. I often, when I write one pagers, it's like 2-sided pages to get a little bit more in there, but it's supposed to be enough to make them want to meet you. Not the whole story, but compelling enough that there's meat there.
Okay, great. So don't go away, because we are going to cover all those, slides that you need to have in that perfect pitch and the intro deck from Donna in a moment. But I want to go back to Nicole. So you talked about what are the things that will convince you to actually meet with a startup. So let's assume that you agreed to meet with someone. If it's virtually or face-to-face, it really doesn't matter. Can you point on what would you like to hear as an investor, as a ground rule during the pitch session that will convince you to keep listening? That this is a certain company, it's worth listening to that person or to these companies.
Yeah, probably the sexiest thing that an entrepreneur could tell me.
Don't say it out loud, because I heard really some things that people took it literally.
Yeah. So not literally, but what really gets me excited is when entrepreneurs tell me, they relay the feedback that they're getting from the market. Experiences, anecdotes, testimonials that they're getting from their customers, even if it's just design partners or POCs saying, hey, we reached out to 40 different CISOs and we got incredible feedback from, Fortune 500 companies that they are looking for a product like this. They're desperate for it. They tried to build it in-house and they failed, and they can't wait to get their hands on it. The second I hear that, like my ears perk up and I realize, okay, there's a clear problem that's being addressed here. They have a good solution, at least initially, and they've already showed that they've made an effort to reach out to potential customers and take feedback. That's one of the most important things that early stage companies can do. So that by far, that's more impressive and more compelling than the founder's background, their credentials, the ARR, product development. That signals a lot to me.
Great, thank you so much for that. So the investor agreed to meet with a startup. You listened to the pitch. Hopefully, you really liked what you heard. Can you describe to our audience what is the standard process for VCs and how they make an investment decision? What goes behind the scenes? So we had our pitch, we got all nervous, we hoped we did a good job, we leave the room. What typically is the process that happens afterwards?
Yeah, so it varies fund by fund, but by and large, what will happen is that the investor who is listening will go back and do some homework, do some research, review the deck again, perhaps reach out to a few of their mates and say, hey, what do you think of this concept? Is this a real problem that you're facing? For instance, if it's a DevOps tool, they'll call up a few of their DevOps friends and say, hey, is this an issue that you're facing? Would you want some technology like this? What's your just general feedback? And based on that, they'll progress. So if that all checks out and things look good, and there's like good momentum building on the investor side, they'll probably have another conversation or two at least with the entrepreneurs, iron out any questions, and then the ultimate stage is to do like a partner pitch meeting. So bring them in to meet all of the partners, all the investment team, and then collect feedback from everyone within the fund, and go from there. So then conversations will get more advanced, perhaps some due diligence, asking to speak with customers, putting the entrepreneur on the phone with people within our network. So kind of introducing them to potential customers while at the same time getting feedback from those potential customers. And then, slowly kind of discussing in broad and like loose terms, what you're thinking about in terms of size of the round and valuation and whatnot. And then you kind of have a go, no go decision. Okay, do we want to do this or do we not? Investment committee, issue a term sheet, and then go on your merry way.
Great. Now I know everybody's waiting for Donna to give us the secrets on how to prepare this perfect pitch. So we worked really hard to prepare that pitch, to prepare the deck. As I said, we sweat and got nervous, standing in front of the investor. We know now that there is a whole process going behind the scene. Nicole, is it okay for us to nudge, quote unquote, the investor and say, hey, what's going on? Should we send you more information? What is the polite way to do it?
Yeah, so great question. My rule of thumb is that like investors should really endeavor to get back to you within a week of the conversation, if not sooner. And obviously, if it's a no, they should, try to say no as soon as possible. And I'll admit I'm guilty of kind of slipping on that from time to time when the workload gets too much, but that's my goal. I think it's appropriate after a week to follow up and give a gentle nudge and say, hey, just wanted to close the loop, or like you said, Sharon, here's some additional information, or kind of this is where we are. But even beyond that, taking a step back, if ultimately that discussion doesn't end up in an immediate investment, I think it's always a good idea to keep the investors in the loop in terms of what you're doing. If it was like a flat out no, because hey, we don't invest in this sector, or we don't invest at this stage, this is too late for us to invest in, then maybe it's not. You don't really need to invest time in that relationship. But for other reasons, I think it's always a good idea to keep in touch with an investor, because it's not a no, it's often a not now. So put them on your quarterly distribution list, send them updates from time to time. So that's how I think about it.
Perfect. One last question. So we know now what we should do in order to put our door in, put our leg in the door, right? Step forward, get that meeting with you. We hope we have this perfect pitch. Question: what will turn you off? What is a big no-no that the minute you hear it during the pitch, or what you see on the slide, you'll say, forget it, I'm out?
So interesting that you brought that up. About a year ago, the founder of our firm, Justin, presented here in Israel at a conference, like the Access Innovation Conference. And it was 10 tips, basically like 10 things that you should not do when pitching to investors. So I just pulled it up actually, and I can run through it really, really quickly with you guys, because I think they're just kind of golden golden tips.
Please
So
do.
one is, so one is basically price to sell. Don't try to raise at a crazy valuation just because a company down the street did. It's only going to harm your prospects and set you up for a down round in the future. So be realistic. The other one is no drama. So smooth out any kind of interpersonal conflicts before you raise. We're going to discover it in due diligence, and don't let that get in the way. Similar to valuation, have realistic projections. Do not present like hockey stick growth just because it looks good. Offer sensible, well thought out, realistic numbers. It's going to show like that you have credibility. And then in terms of your elevator pitch, keep it simple. Like storytelling is an art. I think Donna knows that much better than I do. Justin from IBEX always likes to say, if you can't explain your business to your grandmother in 3 minutes or less, you're not ready to pitch investors. So it should not take you.
We will be talking about the grandma today.
It should not take you 20 minutes to just describe your business. It's terrible use of time. So I said this before, but do your homework. Like, don't walk into a meeting blind. Read up on the VC, understand their strategy and investing style. Show that you care more about just the dollars and the money that they can give you, and try to understand what value they can really give you. Be coachable. So similar to what Donna said, showing that you're stubborn or that you're super fixated on a certain market or a certain go-to-market strategy or a certain business model is a huge turnoff. VCs are signing up for the long haul, and they want to have a really healthy relationship with you, and they want to know that you can accept criticism and advice. So you should also be able to explain the amount of money that you're raising, lay out the milestones that you aim to reach with that next funding round. So similar to like valuations or your revenue projections, don't just pull a figure out of thin air. Be able to kind of back up why the amount of money you're raising is going to help you reach like your next funding round, and what milestones it's gonna get you to. And then anticipate questions. Don't be surprised by tough questions. That means prepare, think about all the weak spots and kind of all the tricky questions that VCs are going to come at you with. And then kind of lastly, 2 last points are make it an easy yes. So have a polished deck, have a data room or some appendixes that show you kind of back up what you're talking about. Be articulate, prepare references. So again, sort of that idea of testimonials. Show that you're super passionate and create a sense of demand. Like FOMO is real and investors have it to the hilt. So don't be afraid of saying, kind of like putting a little bit of the pressure on them without being too salesy. So if you say, yeah, we're already in advanced discussions with a couple funds. Okay, that perks up my ears. We expect to receive a term sheet in the next week or 2. Okay, that's FOMO for me. Or even something like along the lines of, this market is exploding. Gartner just labeled it as one of the emerging trends, this year. Okay, that's FOMO. That means, hey, I want to have a bet in this space. Maybe it's going to be in this company. And then, and the last point was stay in touch. Like, be a polite nudnik. Don't be too aggressive. So that wraps up my bit.
Love this, because it's like everything I'm about to tell you guys, Nicole has just given her stamp of approval. So this is, I love hearing this. This is so important. This is gold. If you all are not writing this down, you're missing out. You can't buy this stuff, seriously.
Yes,
I can send it to you if you want.
Yes, I was just about to ask Nicole if that's okay that we share those 10 points with our attendees and with those that missed today. So that will be great. And Nicole, we want you to stick with us for a while. I want to move to Donna. I see that you already sent us in the chat that this is great. If you go to the chat, you can see from Nicole really the highlights of a summary of what she just mentioned. So I want to switch to Donna, because we got all these, preview of, what the investors are expecting us to show them, but let's learn how to do it. And again, don't be shy, use the chat box, or if you want, just, raise your hand and ask questions. It's really intended to be a seminar and not a webinar, just us looking at, your beautiful photos. But really feel free to, chip in, ask questions, don't be shy. Donna, why don't we start with you are muted. Yes.
Please do ask questions. I'm going to be stopping every few slides to look at the chat and answer your questions. This really is a conversation, and I'm so glad Nicole went first, because there's so many things that I'll be able to affirm and give you like a technique to be able to utilize the golden advice she just gave you. So hi everybody, I'm Donna. For the past 16 years, I've roamed the globe teaching people how to not be boring, how to create powerful messages that drive to business results. So I'm going to try to go a little faster than I normally would, because usually this whole thing is an hour and a half, and the first half hour we wanted to hear from Nicole, and I still want to hear some of your pitches at the end. So March 14th, 2020. Remember that date? The date where we all kind of, our lives changed like we could not even imagine, I think, in this lifetime. And it kind of threw me back for a minute to 2008, when I was getting all the emails of canceled workshops and canceled payments, and well, then I didn't have kids, but now it was also canceled classes and schools. So I got out my 2008 playbook and I started thinking, what are the things people will need now? And one thing I knew was, and I was hearing it from my clients, people were scared to death about raising funding in this time. It was like going into the unknown. So I put together this workshop based on all kinds of materials I've gathered to really help us power our pitch and pivot our story. Some encouraging news: these are companies that were either born out of the last crisis or did extremely well in the last crisis. Airbnb and Groupon, the world had not had a model like shared economy or coupons at scale. I mean, growing up in the States, I'm a coupon girl. I was, you click coupons, and if you can get a discount, that was at least in our household. But it wasn't as widespread throughout the world. Netflix went from being a blockbuster sent out to you to the king and queen reign of all content. Amazon left, Lego went into Asia. So these times can really give birth to amazing companies, but your message matters more than ever. As Nicole said, there are investments being made, people are signing checks. But what I see with the trend with my clients is the people that are getting funding are those that are able to really show the urgency, the FOMO, as she said. So we're going to get into that a lot later on. So speaking of Lego, the method that I want to give you for organizing your message, because we're going to be running in a double track here today. We're going to be talking about the storytelling and structuring your message, and then we're going to also talk about tips and tricks and insider scoops that I've gotten from Silicon Valley venture partners, and I want to pass on to you completely anonymized, as I promised. So Legos, the secret and the amazing thing that Legos have that they still makes them one of the most popular toys in the world is that it's the creative expression where structure meets flexibility. Sounds a little like an oxymoron, doesn't it? But you can build anything as long as you stick to the structure. You can't start bending and breaking and trying to be smarter than that. But once you have that structure in place, you can be as creative as you want with what you build. And it's the same thing with your content. Storytelling is an ancient art. If you go back to Greek tragedies, Shakespeare, Molière, Chekhov, all of these, even the Bible, there's a very specific way that stories are structured. And once you get it, you'll be able to utilize it for any kind of message. But today, of course, we're going to focus on the investor message. So the first thing, and please remember, add questions. I know I'm going a little faster than usual, so slow me down if you need to. All right, you're going to chunk your story into 4 points, which actually become your agenda. Now, what do I mean by that? Why 4? When we start going to school as kids, and anybody that has young kids can attest to this, we have an endless capacity for learning. It's just, our brains are little sponges. If any of you have tried to learn something new in the past few years, a new language, a new profession, coding, dancing, whatever, a little bit harder at our ripe ages because our hard drives are mega full. Our operating systems are like Windows 19 or maybe even DOS. And as people in general and Israelis in particular, we know everything, right? It's very hard to teach us something new because we've already heard it all. So our brains are either going, yeah, or whatever, or we're just kind of flighting or fighting. So the principle of learning for adults is called the principle of chunking. 5 + 2 - 2, meaning 3 to 7 chunks of information is all our poor brains are capable of taking in at once. And I say, you know what? Go for something good in the middle. 4 really works. So look at this and tell me if you get it after. So let's say I were to start off this presentation saying, hi, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about fresh fruit. We'll talk about bananas, lemons, oranges, watermelon, carambola, mango, coconut, and grapes. What do you remember from that list? Grapes, or maybe carambola, something that stuck out to you. But if I were to start off and say, hi, everyone, today we're going to be talking about fresh fruit. We'll start off with citrus fruit, including lemons, grapefruit, and oranges. Then we'll move on to tropical fruit, including coconuts, mango, and passion fruit. And finally, we'll end off with forest fruit, blueberries, strawberries, boysenberries. A little easier to remember? Our brains do that all day long. And Nicole mentioned a few times, oh, sometimes things slip away from me when it gets really busy. Our lives are busy. The investors are not sitting there talking just about you, okay? They got other stuff going on. So if you can organize your messages in a way that fits into their chunks and their compartments in their brain and the way our brain has been conditioned to take in information from the time we are young children, you are going to have a much better chance of getting through to them. And like she said, it should not take you 20 minutes to explain your business. So this, I've gone ahead and chunked the sections of an investor pitch outline. And this is not one slide each. This is just a collection of slides in each one of these buckets. Now, some of you are probably sitting there saying, oh, the problem solution, that's like so passé. It works, okay? People expect it and it works, and it shows that you truly understand the audience that you are catering to. And this is where it gets age old. You know, we could say Shakespeare is passé, or we can say it's, you know, the origins of the way we communicate. Movie scripts, they are still written. There's like 8 archetypal scripts that get rewritten, but they're all structured in a way that we can go with it and yet enjoy the creativity and the twists. So we're going to dive into each of these sections. I also like to add a slide at the end of the deck that I call key investment merits, kind of a summary of the 6 most wow things you said throughout your presentation, because time has elapsed and they might have gone on to, you know, forgotten exactly what you said. You want to make sure it's there and it's sharp. There's 3 things, and Nicole, you can maybe back me up on this or add some more, that investors have told me that they are listening for, and it's credibility, likability, and momentum. How well do you know your stuff? How credentialed is your team, your background? Momentum, how far have you gotten? How much social proof, how much traction do you have? And likability, are you coachable? Are you somebody they're going to want to spend the next several years with? So these are 3 things that we want our slides to speak to all the time. Thank you, Nicole. She said spot on. I love it. Thanks. So you're going to start off introducing yourself. All right. Now, if you have good news, and we'll talk about this in a minute, don't wait to deliver it. You can start off with that, especially if you're raising Series A and beyond. But unless your team looks like that, you don't necessarily need to put them at the very beginning. You can introduce the people in the room, but if your team is credifying you, exits, 20 plus years of industry experience, serious advisory board, definitely put them at the beginning. But if y'all are just, you know, it's your first startup, you're just out of school or whatever, not necessary to put the whole team at the beginning. There will be another place to put it. Now, I have seen pitches where the founder waits till slide 17 to say something like, yeah, we just closed a contract with Johnson & Johnson, and we have a POC for 150K from Costco. And the investors were like, why are you waiting till slide 17 to tell me this? If you have good news, and like Nicole said, it made her ears perk up when she hears things. If you have significant sales, significant growth, in Silicon Valley, they love the month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year growth. Engagement, stickiness, you're showing testimonials of people that love you and cannot live without you. Major partnerships you've closed, IP or regulatory processes that have already either been, you've gotten patent or pending, or you've moved forward towards FDA, whatever your realm might be. And of course, amazing testimonials, and you should start gathering those ASAP, because another part of it is, like she said, when you move into due diligence, they're gonna talk to your customers. So you might as well have the champions there ready and waiting, but make them sit up and listen, make their ears perk up, because they will listen to you differently if they know that this is a company that's already got the momentum going. Okay, questions pop in there. Numbers make them believers. I've sat in meetings where investors are like, oh, I don't do blockchain, or I'm not, a fan of whatever. And then they hear numbers, and they hear growth, and they hear sales, and suddenly it's not such a bad thing. So it doesn't mean they're necessarily going to invest, but real numbers can change your mind. Stay away from vanity metrics. We all know how that can end. Let's talk about something that is probably the most missed point, and that's your North Star, your vision statement. If they ask you here in a meeting, what's your vision, and you start talking about what your product does, you failed that question. And a lot of the questions you're asked are also to see how you respond. So Simon Sinek says that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So there's 3 levels of explanation of what you're doing that you need to have in your presentation. Start off with the why. Get them excited about the big vision. What are you going to be when you grow up? Then you talk about the what. What is it that you're doing now? What is your product? What is your company? We're going to talk about that in a second. And then how, which will be showing how it works. So if you can get those 3 things in simply, that is your golden circle. So just to show you some of the whys of some companies you might know of, and this doesn't necessarily describe what their products do. Microsoft to enable people and businesses throughout the world to realize their full potential. Google to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Intuit, I love this one, even though I'm not a huge Intuit fan, even though I've become a paid user of theirs in the last year, to improve its customers' financial lives so profoundly they couldn't imagine going back to the old way. That's stickiness, that's engagement. That's like, okay, I'm hooked, you've got me, I'm a subscriber, we're never leaving you, we love you to pieces. So these are the kind of things we want to look for, all right? So work on your North Star, your why. Now, then, once you've kind of introduced, made the nice rounds, kind of given them a teaser, a sneak peek, you're going to start on your first chunk, which was either the problem or the opportunity. So there's 2 ways to approach it. You can go for the stick. There's a pain in the world. There's something that you are going to prevent pain from happening or ease that pain, the stick. Or, hallelujah, I can't believe they came up with this. This is so exciting. I never knew I wanted it until they just said it now, and that's the carrot. Either way can work depending on the audience, depending on the use case. But the best way to do it is to turn it into a story. It can be your origin story of how you came up with the idea, something that happened to you, to a loved one, to society at large. It can be a big hack story. So for example, I was working with a cyber company. They actually work on ransomware. And did you know that with ransomware, and I didn't know this before I started working with them, basically the hackers have been in the system for several months before they even become detected. And they've already gotten the information they need. The ransomware is just the culmination of this, which is why they can so fast start really showing that they're sending out personal information. So we took a use case of a customer of theirs who is a medical organization with 400 hospitals around the world that went through a ransomware attack. showing that they had them lurking in their system for months before. The damage was millions of dollars, 2 weeks of downtime, and reputation beyond repair. So that is the kind of story that is like, yeah, oh my God. And you don't necessarily want the most known stories. You can go for the less known that you know. I've heard investors say, if you can teach me something new, I will consider this a successful move. Show them something they might not know, not in an arrogant way, in a way that's like, oh, wow, that's really astounding. Now, Mark Twain said, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Mind you, I am not encouraging you to lie. However, with storytelling, you have poetic license. I was working with another team that were getting very technical, and they were like, oh, well, we're image analysis experts with computer vision and deep learning. And I'm like, okay, but what is it that you're doing? And they kept going and going and going. And finally, one of the founders said, you know, this one time we were in Tokyo, I was like, my antenna of storytelling came up. We're like, oh, you mean you came up with the idea for the company in Tokyo? That's so exciting. They're like, no, we already told you we were an elite unit with blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay, be quiet. Y'all came up with the idea in Tokyo, okay? They looked at me kind of funny, and then they got it. Because doesn't it sound sexier, to quote Nicole, to say something like, we were roaming the streets of Tokyo, feeling lost in translation, looking at these beautiful buildings, having no clue what we were looking at. And then I thought, wow, wouldn't it be neat if I could just take my camera, snap a picture of the building, and immediately it could tell me where I was, what I was looking at, the history, what's around me. And then I thought, well, with all our computer vision and image analysis. And so it was. Now, Nicole, would you ask to see their passport to see if they had gone to Tokyo before or after they filed to open the company, if you heard a story like that? Not likely, probably not, because it's about making the story resonate. And everybody here probably was thinking about a time they flew into a country that they didn't read the language and feeling kind of lost. Our brains are hardwired for stories. This is my oldest. When she was 2, she's now 7. She would take piles of books and surround herself and read. Her little sister does this now, and now she devours chapter books. Kids can listen to the same stories again and again and again because their little brains develop off of the way they are structured. And stories have a way of connecting us, resonating with us. There's a part in our brain called the insula that the minute we hear a story, it'll go searching for, oh, that reminds me of the time, and then it awakens in us feelings of identification and happiness and sadness and shared emotions. And it's so powerful that there have been studies shown that, you know how we say, oh, we were totally on the same wavelength? That our brain waves actually can sync up when we are a storyteller and a story listener at the same time. And that's a moment of true influence. People are not finding ways to argue when they are enraptured by your story. Very powerful tool. So another element of storytelling is the hero and the villain. I think in action and adventure movies, in the first 2 minutes, if we don't see the villain or a villainous act, a kidnapping, explosion, something bad happening, we're kind of bored. We're like, okay, get on with it. So you want them to understand the villain as fast as possible. And the villain isn't someone, the villain is a concept. Now, this list I made back in 2009, in the height of the economic crisis. And these were the problems that most companies were grappling with and still are grappling with. I mean, bad economy, Airbnb, security vulnerabilities, cyber, waste in the system, sustainability has become huge now. Now, the last 3 are the carrots, the boredom, popularizing cultural trend, missing a great opportunity. Those are not the, okay, I'm solving brain cancer, but these are also things that are very lucrative markets. I mean, look at freaking TikTok. Sorry, I feel very old when I look at that, but it's become such a thing because people need a way to fill their time and to entertain themselves. It's always the next thing that's happening. In 2020, as the world was kind of once again imploding, I started thinking, okay, looking at this, what are the big things that are going to be dealt with this year? And so I wrote this list back in March of last year. And I've seen that there's been a lot of movement in this direction. I had clients that basically saw the crisis happening and they're like, okay, how can we take our existing technology? Get this story, this is amazing. I had a client that they were working on a blockchain app that could ensure that someone was free of STDs for them to be marked on a dating app as safe. I haven't been on dating apps in years, but apparently this is a big thing. The minute the pandemic hit, they pivoted it to a blockchain that could ensure negative tests, vaccinations, anything in order to automatically let people clear themselves for entry to airplanes, to concert venues, to office buildings. Who would have thought that that's an issue this last year at this time? And yet, so if you're working in any realm that can touch on any of these things, this is the time to show how you are creating the urgency and the FOMO, that you can make it work now for relevant things for the world. All right, so that was the problem, by the way. That's the problem opportunity, that's that first section. And then we get to the solution. And as Nicole said, it should not take you 20 minutes to explain it. You need to create your simple solution statement. We do X for Y by Z or Z. All right, a simple sentence that anyone can get, whether they have a degree in computer science, cryptography, or otherwise. And as fast as possible, and by the way, the grammar story, I don't remember if I have that in here into this, but I always tell people it should be a statement that your grandma could understand. And sorry, it's grandpa too, or your parents, or anyone, or an 8-year-old. And Einstein said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. So you need to really get clear on that. And as fast as possible, you want to show it. You can talk about an iPad for an hour, but the minute you show it, people get it. Our brains are primarily visual. We need to see it to believe it. So there's several different ways to show a demo, but the most important part is to show that you truly understand your customer. That's another thing investors want to see. Do you understand your market? Are you in touch with them? Are you truly catering to them? Because they're going to be paying you money, and they can only pay you money. They'll only pay you money if they think you're bringing value. So one of my favorite ways to do a demo is through a user story. If you have true users, take us on their journey of onboarding with you. If you have not launched your product yet, take us on an as-if journey for a company that you aspire to work with. So if so for example, we did a deconstructed user story with a cyber company. We started off in the problem section talking about the struggle of that hospital chain before working with them. Then we talked about, okay, what happens now? How do we prevent this? How would we prevent it if we had been in sooner? So the struggle was at the beginning, then the onboarding, implementation, results, loving testimonial. That will do the trick, and it will also show off the features of your product without you just reading off a laundry list. It brings your product to life. You can show screenshots. You can do a live demo, little risk there of live demos have a way of dying, especially when we're remote and Zoom and videos and internet. Just be careful because it just doesn't reflect well on your product if suddenly it's not working for whatever reason. You can do another 1 or 2 shorter use cases to show different verticals that you're working in, but this is momentum. This is showing killer features through the story. Let your users be your champions. What they say about you is gold. It's so much more persuasive than you saying it about yourself. So just make sure if somebody loves you, don't just let it go unnoticed. Just say, would you mind if I got that in writing? Sometimes they'll have to anonymize it. They'll have to put it through their legal department, but most people are very happy to write it. You can also say this is just for our internal fundraising purposes. We won't put it on our website, even though it's great to have these on websites as well, because then you're selling your story to your customers as well. If you didn't have a brag slide at the beginning, this is a good time as you're transitioning into your third bucket, which is the business side of things. How far along are you? What have you accomplished till now? It's okay to say that you're launching your beta or that you have letters of intent or you're not. It's much, the further along you are, you have more leverage to raise. I don't know, Nicole, this is often a conversation that I have, when the right time to raise is. And I know that a lot of investors say, okay, you need to show us at least an MVP. But then if you're too far ahead, it's like, okay, let's see how far you can get. What do you think about when is the best time to actually start the fundraise?
Wow, really case by case basis. I think it depends on the capital requirements of the business and kind of where the entrepreneurs are personally as well. I personally like to see a demonstrated track record of them working together. So I want to see that they've been working on this for a couple months at least. A prototype is excellent, and most importantly, initial feedback from the market from potential customers, and if they have a design partner or two lined up who they're already working with, that's even better.
Great. So try to get as far as you can on your sweat equity to show that you've got something to show before you go out and fundraise. Sometimes people will call me for a consultation session and I'll just say, come back to me in a few months. I'm not going to take your money to write you a pitch deck when you're just not ready yet. And so much is going to change in the next few months.
This
okay.
is very important. And sorry, Donna, I'm just going to interrupt you for a second because I know Nicole needs to jump off our conversation into another call that she has. But I do want to mention that to our audience here that, of course, this is being recorded, but also that we will share with you the 10 tips that Nicole shared with us earlier. And if you want to speak with her, if you want to pitch to IBEX investors, if you want us to make the connections, that's also, of course, possible. Nicole shared her email address in the chat box, so you can feel free to reach out to her directly. If you want us to make the introduction, we will be happy to do it afterwards. But really, before we part from Nicole, if you have a question that you want to raise right now and ask her directly, as long as we have Nicole with us, please don't be shy. You can just unmute yourself, open your mic and open your camera and ask Nicole. Otherwise, let's see, what do we have? We have anything specifically in the chat? I don't see. Again, Nicole's email. Thank you so much, Nicole, for sharing your email. This is really something that you don't get very often from investors, just sharing their email and asking you send us your pitch or any information that you need. If you don't feel comfortable to do it now, I can make the introduction later on. Nicole, any last word of advice before we go back to Donna?
Donna's presentation is so spot on. I'm learning things, and she's just incredible. This is the first time I've heard it, and I have to say it's absolutely spot on. So thank you, Donna. I'm sorry to be missing the rest of it, but I look forward to seeing it in the future. And thank you for having me, Sharon. Really appreciate it. Really great to see you.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you, Nicole.
Bye, everybody. Input. I learned things too. Okay, so moving right along. All right, so there's 3 things that you really want to stress when you talk about your business. Your differentiation, what truly sets you apart. Okay, we want to show that visually. Do not do this, please. Investors hate it. They have to work to sit there reading what you wrote up there. And even if it was opposite, no one's going to do that work. And even worse, sometimes I see like words written, not just checks and X's. It just, maybe if you really want to do a drill down into it, you could put that in backup. Okay, the 2x2. I personally think it's great. I've heard investors be like, oh, that thing again. But then I've heard other investors say, well, why didn't you have your 2x2? Why didn't you have your landscape put up in XY? So stick to something simple. This was Airbnb's when they were raising one of their rounds, affordable and online transaction, clear points of differentiation. This is great if you have 2 distinct differentiators. Just do it well, do it simple. Another option, this is a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit harder to do. This is the Marketscape, the IBC Marketscape. This is kind of showing, okay, you're here now, these are the big leaders, how are you going to get from here to there? And investors, as you see these quotes down here, say it's okay to show some hubris as to how we are going to conquer the bigger guys. They like to see that kind of confidence. You just need to have real ways of doing it. So they like that one. This is another option that investors say they like, just putting a simple, the logos and talk about, okay, there's these kinds, then there's us. I like to take that one step further. This is my personal favorite. If you compete or complete several different types of competitors, use the petal diagram. This was created by Steve Blank, who's a professor at Berkeley. And it's a great way to show how you touch on different areas of your industry. Some of these are competitors of Slack, and some of them are, they work together and they integrate. So it's just showing that. So when you touch on many, that's a great one. One thing I don't want you to do is ever diss your competition. And I've heard it happen before, especially with Israeli companies. I'm sorry, but I have. And it really looks bad. It really looks bad, especially here in the Valley, right, Sharon? We hear everything is like, oh my God, amazing, great, cool, happy, smiley, this. If you hear somebody being negative, it's an automatic turnoff. It's one of those red flags. So please, having competitors gives you a viable market. So build on their success. And also, according to this quote, look at both the big players and the VC-backed players. All right, those are the ones you want to show. Turn over every rock and find competitors. That's embarrassing to not have them bring up a competitor you don't know about. Monetization. How are you making money? How will you be making money? You might have future revenue streams. And opportunization. It's not a real word, but it rhymes with differentiation and monetization. So I took license. This is the FOMO. This is the true sense of urgency. This is the why us, why now? And I call this the trends and opportunities that are driving the heat under their tuchus. All right, why should they invest in you now? Now, about a month ago, when Airbnb IPO'd, a blog post of Brian Chesky surfaced that he had written back in 2015. All it was 5 rejection letters that they had received from investors when they were raising, get this, $150K at a $500K valuation. He said there were another 2 letters that just didn't respond to them. And it was things like, yeah, we don't really see this. It's not in our pipeline. So I'm sure all of those investors who they blacked out the names, of course, were kicking themselves. You want to take them on that journey 5 years from now, looking back and asking themselves, am I going to be kicking myself for not getting on this train? You heard Nicole, FOMO is a real thing. Don't make up things like, oh, we've got several term sheets, because they will ask. VCs talk to each other, okay? They talk to each other. They share information. I was in a car once going from one event to another with 3 different VC partners. It was like being on Gossip Girl. I swear to God, they were just talking about this company. They share information. Be careful. Be careful. Everyone knows everyone.
I can tell you also that, with the CICC, we work a lot with investors, and we actually have sessions where investors from different companies sit together and we look at, at the same company. So they do share information. They say, oh, I saw this company. This is what we think. Oh, I saw this company 6 months ago and we felt X, Y, Z. So it happens. It's not just about gossiping. And there is also the fact of referrals. Unfortunately, Nicole is not here with us anymore, but VCs do refer to others. It might be not in my focus, but I know another investor that is, and I really like you. I like your solution. I like what you're doing. I'll send you to my friend.
Absolutely.
So don't forget that for a second.
And you by the way, you want it to be a good reason that a VC is referring you. They don't, like what Sharon said, they don't invest in your field, or they don't invest at your stage. Otherwise, it's like, well, why aren't they investing in them? So make sure the referral is for someone who can't invest in you for whatever reason. But that's like the hierarchy of referrals is another investor. Okay. Keep any questions, guys, please bring them up. They don't wait. I'm happy to answer. If you didn't put your team at the beginning, this is a good place to do it. And don't go over their entire resume. Just tell us why they are the ones. What are the assets that they bring to the table that make them a stellar team to get this off the ground? Our final buckets. So we had the problem or opportunity. We had the solution. We had the business side of things. And then we have the vision for the future. You want to get them even more excited. Talk about your roadmap, talk about additional markets, additional features, additional products, and then link it to your vision. If you had your North Star at the beginning, now tell us, okay, how is this just the beginning of the journey forward? Now, what I don't like to see is like our 3-year plan or our 5-year plan. Seriously, it's like basically to me, like going like this and putting your finger up there. Stick to the timeline of the runway of what you're asking for. If you're asking for an 18-month run, I think that's by like, yes, then give us that roadmap. If it's a 24-month, give us that roadmap. Show us actual milestones that you're going to hit, KPIs, all right, both in sales and in product. So get as specific as possible. Investors want they want to be able to look forward. So you can go to the end, where will you be at the end of this runway, and then work backwards and break it down seriously, like even into, again, I had one investor say that when he's writing a check, he's already thinking about the next round. He's on the hook for it. Because if they are in your round now and they're not investing in your next round, unless of course, right, like we said, there's a good reason they don't invest onward, they're on the hook. They will break the next round if they can't. So he's already thinking, are these KPIs achievable? So make sure they're measurable, achievable, and numbers, put in the numbers, show that you've thought a lot about it. So this is the outline again, just to reiterate, and I will make these slides available to you. Speaking of slides, there is no excuse for shoddy looking slides. And Nicole said something about formatting in emails and not putting names. You would not believe how much design matters to them. I've seen founders ripped apart because their slides look like vivid. So make sure your slides look as good as your product does, because it's how they associate it to your product. There's all kinds of great tools that are free or freemium, like Canva, Slidebean, Slidebot, Email, Psychodeck, all kinds of things you can do, or hire a good designer. If you have a UI person, let them work the magic on the slides. I have some great designers in Israel that I've worked with for many years that I send my clients after I create the story. I don't have talent when it comes to visuals. My little girls can draw better than I can, but if you want it to look the part, you want it to sound the part and look the part. Don't make your audience want to commit suicide. It's just too much. We talked about the teaser deck. Have a version to send out that doesn't have so much verbiage on it, because the minute you have a ton of words on the slide, they are listening to, they're not listening to you, they are reading the slide. They cannot read and listen to you at the same time. Our brain signals get crossed. So don't compete with your own words. And like I said before, here's the grandma. One big idea that grandma could understand. I'm going to skip that for now just because we're short on time. That was the grandma story and how that came about. Okay, we have another question in here. Love the term death by suicide. Yes, people do want to commit suicide sometimes when they see these things. Q&A, it is so important. It is so important. I see people prep for pitches, be really astute, and then they're asked questions and they completely lose themselves. They're like a deer in headlights. So I have, I usually have the link on it, I don't know what happened, but on my website under resources, I've compiled the ultimate list of investor questions that you need to know how to answer. There's over 100 and they're categorized. Just like you would prepare for the pitch, prepare for questions. It's even more important than the pitch, because sometimes they will ask you things just to see how you deal with being in an uncomfortable position. And please, for the love of God, never argue with them. They might be wrong, They might be completely off. They might be doing that on purpose to see how you respond. Because the minute you argue with them, or you are rude, or you are arrogant, or you tell them, no, you're wrong, guess what? Deal's gone. It doesn't mean they're God. It just means they want to see that you can be a mensch and have a discussion. You may disagree, and you may have a way to defend yourself. Say it in a menschy-like way, all right? Don't argue. It's so bad. It's so painful. I've seen it happen, and I just,
Yes, and I'm jumping in because I've been in a meeting, and once the the potential candidate for investment left the room, one of the investors said, I really like the product, but I won't be able to work with that person.
I'll raise you one. I heard someone ask afterwards, so what do you think? Oh, great product, stellar team. So you're going to invest? No, because if I sat on their board, I'd have to shoot myself.
Yes, exactly. So that's super important. Don't argue with them. Be likable. Not just your product, not just your service. It's even you and what you present, because if they invest in your company, you have to work with them. They have to work with you. And this is where you set the standard of who you are. And it goes back to the term of coachable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry.
And that likability piece, and leading into that, and we're almost finished with my piece, and then I want to hear from you guys. We're going to do some lightning rounds of elevator pitches. So those of you that are inkling to give it a try, go ahead and you can put your name in the chat. So how many of you have ever felt that gnawing sense of fear that Sharon was describing at the beginning of before a big meeting? If you're not raising your hand, keep telling yourself that, because it's the most natural thing in the world. I ask people, where are they feeling it? And it's either butterflies in your stomach, or your heart racing, or shortness of breath, dry mouth. I call this the pipe of terror, everything from your mouth down to your belly. Put that aside a second and think about the last time you were really excited about something. A big meeting, a big event, our workshop today. No. But if you think about where you felt the excitement, butterflies in your stomach, heart beating, shortness of breath, dry mouth. Oh, interesting. Same thing. Same thing. Exactly the same thing. And I'll tell you another secret. Those butterflies can either be your worst enemy or your best friend. If they hear, oh my God, I'm so nervous, they go, ha ha, and they turn black and grow fangs and start choking you and flying up here, and you can't breathe. And of course, you're not going to remember anything, as opposed to, ooh, I'm excited about this pitch. And they love a good party. They will throw on their Burning Man clothes and pop a few shots of tequila and put on Tiesto and have a party. And they will carry your passion. And that big fear becomes face everything and recover. I've met many, many, many entrepreneurs over my 16 years of doing this. And there are those that I call them the enlightened ones, because they have this twinkle, they have this sparkle about them. They have this thing that just make people fall in love with them. And they've gone on to do extremely well. Be the enlightened ones. Show yourself at your best, which is my final point of the day. They don't know that you had 2 hours of sleep last night. They don't know that you just had a big fight with your partners. They don't know that you were stuck in traffic. All they know is the person that's walked in the room or into the Zoom is you. And as Sharon said, and Nicole said, and I said, they really want to like you. They want to like your product. They want to like you too, because some investments last longer than marriages. And you want to know that when the good and the bad and the ugly come around, you've got a good partner to work with. And there's no second chance for a first impression. Pretty much in the first 30 seconds, you know if a person has a chance of going through or not. So make that first appearance a great one. And just to summarize my piece before we hear some elevator pitches, Stuart Butterfield, the founder of Slack, said that if there was one piece of advice I could give to my younger self, concentrate on the storytelling, on convincing people. If you can't do that, it doesn't matter how good the product is. So I want to see you all with products flying off the shelves, not sitting on the shelves, getting investments and charming the heck out of investors with your ability to deliver and to storytell the delivery. So thank you very much for being here. And now I hope in the 15 minutes we have left, we're here to answer questions and to do some pitch back. So if you want to give it a go and you have something you want to pitch, just the elevator part of it, the problem solution, the first two buckets, we're here to give you some feedback.
Thank you, Donna, for this. It's amazing. Every time I listen to you, I learn more things. You know, I pay attention to something new. Many years of experience, obviously, you know, putting this presentation together. And we talked about referrals. So, you know, it's not a selling pitch or anything like that, but we love working with you because you really bring that experience from both sides, from the investor sides and working with many investors. And we would love to recommend you to our audience. But it's not just a saying. We have an opportunity now for, you know, the few minutes that we are left with. And I know some people had to leave because it's really a long seminar today. But if there is anyone that is still here with us, and I can stop the recording. So you know what? I'm actually going to stop the recording of this session. So